My son left me on the side of the highway with a flat tire and a dead phone, looked me in the eye and said, "Guess you should have written the will sooner, Dad." Then he drove away. When he showed up at my door 3 days later expecting an apology, I had already changed every lock in the house and called his employer. I need to back up. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a union electrician in Columbus, Ohio. My hands are rough, my knees ache when it rains, and I have never in my life asked anyone for anything I wasn't prepared to earn myself. My name is Bernard Cole, and I raised my son the same way, or at least I thought I did. His name is Kevin. He's 34 now. When he was small, maybe 7 or 8, he used to follow me around the garage on Saturday mornings while I worked on my truck. He'd hand me tools before I even asked for them. Socket wrench. Before the words were out of my mouth, he just knew. I used to think that was something special between us, some kind of frequency only fathers and sons can tune into. I kept that memory like a photograph in my wallet for years, pulling it out whenever things got hard between us. Things got hard often as he got older. Kevin dropped out of his second year at Ohio State. That was his choice, and I didn't push. Not everyone's built for college. I certainly wasn't. But then he couldn't hold a job. Warehouse delivery driver, sales rep at a car dealership. Nothing stuck longer than 8 months. Each time, there was a reason. The manager was unfair. The hours were impossible. The company was crooked. Always something outside of Kevin, never anything inside him. His mother, my ex-wife Joanne, used to say I was too hard on him. Maybe, but I also watched her hand him money every time he called, and I watched that money disappear without a trace of improvement in his life. We divorced when Kevin was 15, and I think the truth is that both of us overcompensated in different directions. She gave him too much. I expected too much. Either way, we both failed him in our own way. I remarried in my early 50s. Her name is Connie, and she is the steadiest, most clear-eyed person I have ever known. She works as a medical billing coordinator. She grows tomatoes in the backyard, and she has never once raised her voice in the years we've been together. Kevin never warmed to her. He was polite enough at holidays, but there was always a coldness in him when she was in the room. I noticed it, but told myself it was just adjustments. Step families take time. Connie noticed it too. She never said anything bad about Kevin to me, not once, but sometimes I'd catch a look on her face after he left, a kind of quiet worry that she kept folded up behind her eyes. About 2 years ago, Kevin started calling more often, which sounds like a good thing. It wasn't. The calls were always about money, or about what I was planning to do with the house, or about whether I'd thought about retirement accounts and what would happen to them. He asked once very casually whether Connie had her own savings or whether we had everything joint. I told him that wasn't his business. He laughed and said he was just asking. I should have paid closer attention to the pattern, but he was my son. Last April, he called and said he wanted to take a drive together. Just the two of us. He said he'd been doing some thinking about our relationship and wanted to spend some real time together. I was so relieved to hear it that I didn't question the timing. We made plans for the following Saturday. He picked me up at 7 in the morning. We'd drive out to Hocking Hills, maybe hike a trail, grab lunch somewhere. I was ready at 6:55. Connie handed me a travel mug of coffee and squeezed my arm. "Have a good time," she said. I think she meant it. Kevin pulled up 20 minutes late in a truck I didn't recognize. A newer F-150 grey clean. I asked him about it and he said he was making payments. I didn't ask on what. We got on Route 33 and for the first 30 minutes things felt almost normal. He asked about my knee, whether I was still doing the physical therapy. He asked about a buddy of mine from work who'd had a bypass surgery. He seemed present in a way he hadn't been in years, and I found myself relaxing into it, letting myself believe that maybe something had genuinely shifted in him. We stopped at a gas station outside Lancaster so he could use the restroom. I got out to stretch my legs. The air smelled like cut grass and diesel. A woman was filling up her minivan with 3 kids strapped in the back, all watching something on a tablet. I remember thinking it was a good kind of ordinary, the kind of Saturday morning the world is supposed to have. Kevin came out of the station and said he wanted to show me something off the main road. There was an old property he'd heard about, some land near a creek that had been in someone's family for generations. He'd been looking into buying property, he said. Investing. He asked if I knew anything about land value in that area. I said a little. He said he valued my opinion. We turned off the highway onto a 2-lane county road, then onto a gravel road. The landscape got quieter. Trees closed in on both sides, and the gravel got looser, and I noticed we were maybe 12 or 15 miles from the last gas station, with no other cars on the road since we turned off. I said, "How far back is this place?" He said, "Not much further." We drove another 5 minutes. Then he pulled over on the shoulder and put the truck in park. Left the engine running. He sat there with both hands on the wheel, not looking at me. I felt something shift in the air, the way the temperature drops right before a storm. I said, "Kevin?" He said, "I need to talk to you about your estate plan." I said, "We can talk about that any time. What are we doing out here?" He turned and looked at me then. There was something in his eyes that I don't have a word for. Not anger exactly, more like a decision that had already been made. He said, "You need to change the beneficiary on your life insurance policy, and you need to do it before Connie convinces you to do something else with it." I told him that my life insurance was my business, same as I'd told him before. He said, "Dad, I'm your blood. Whatever you've got should go to blood." I said, "I need you to start driving." He said, "I'm serious." I said, "So am I." Then he reached across me and opened my door. I had a half-second of confusion before he put his hand flat on my chest and shoved, not hard enough to hurt me, but hard enough that I grabbed the door frame to catch myself, and in that half-second of scrambling, he shoved again, and I was out. I stumbled on the gravel, caught myself on one knee, tore the knee of my jeans. By the time I was fully upright, he had my door closed and the truck rolling forward. He lowered the window as he passed me and said, "Guess you should have written the will sooner, Dad." Then he accelerated and left me standing on a gravel road in rural Fairfield County with a torn pair of jeans and a travel mug of Connie's coffee that I was somehow still holding. I stood there for a moment just processing it. The sound of his engine faded. A crow landed on a fence post about 20 feet away and watched me with what felt like judgment. My phone was at about 11%. I had no idea exactly where I was. I started walking back toward the main road, keeping to the gravel shoulder, watching for cars. I called Connie first. She answered on the second ring, and I told her calmly where I was, as best I could describe it, and that Kevin had left me on the road. There was a long pause, and then she said, "Are you hurt?" I said no. She said, "Okay, I'm coming." Then my phone died. I walked for about 45 minutes. The crow followed me for a while, landing on posts and wires ahead of me, which I decided to take as company rather than omen. Eventually I reached Route 33 and flagged down a man in a construction vehicle who let me sit in his cab and use his phone to call Connie back with my exact location. She arrived an hour and 20 minutes after I'd called her. When her car pulled up, I got in and she handed me a granola bar and didn't say a single word until I'd eaten half of it. Then she said, "Tell me exactly what happened." I told her. She sat very still through the whole thing. When I finished, she said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Connie is not a dramatic person. She does not cry easily or speak in ultimatums. But she had been watching Kevin for years with those quiet, worried eyes, and she had apparently been thinking about contingencies that I had refused to let myself think about. The next morning, she sat down with me at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and we went through everything. Life insurance policy, beneficiary review, retirement accounts, beneficiary review, the house, the savings, the truck. She had already looked up the name of an estate attorney she trusted through a colleague at the hospital where she worked. We met with the attorney 4 days later. Her name was Ms. Okafor, a sharp woman in her early 50s who had clearly heard variations of this story before. She did not flinch, did not offer sympathy in a way that felt hollow. She just took notes and gave us options. We spent 3 hours in her office and left with a clear plan. I also called my insurance agent that week and had a candid conversation about everything. He flagged something that I hadn't known to look for. Kevin had called the insurance company 6 weeks earlier, claiming to be me, and asking questions about the policy payout process and how beneficiary changes worked. He had been told they could only speak to the account holder. He had not given up. I sat with that for a long time. He had planned this, not impulsively, not in a moment of anger. He had been working through the logistics, testing the edges, figuring out what was in the way, and what was in the way, apparently, was me being alive long enough to change my mind. I thought about that Saturday morning again, the way he'd seemed present and engaged on the drive down. The questions about my knee and my friend's surgery. He had been performing warmth, practicing it maybe, to keep me comfortable until he'd gotten me far enough off the main road. I didn't confront him. I want to be clear about that. I made a deliberate choice not to reach out to him and not to warn him that anything had changed. I spoke with a detective at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office about what had happened. The detective, a quiet man named Sergeant Adkins, took the report seriously. He noted that while what Kevin had done existed in a grey area legally, it wasn't technically assault in the clearest sense, and I hadn't been physically injured. The documented call to my insurance company using my identity was a different matter. That was fraud, or close enough to it that it warranted further investigation. Sergeant Adkins asked me to write down everything I remembered in as much detail as possible, including the timeline of the insurance call, the conversations Kevin and I had about the estate in the months before, and everything that happened on the road. I spent 2 evenings doing that, 12 pages, handwritten, because I still think better with a pen in my hand. In the meantime, I had also called Kevin's employer. He was working as a facilities coordinator at a property management company in Westerville. I did not call to get him fired. I called because he had listed me as an emergency contact, and I needed that removed. I wanted nothing linking me to him professionally. But in the course of that conversation, the HR manager mentioned that Kevin had recently submitted paperwork requesting a salary advance citing a family emergency. The family emergency was, apparently, me. He had told his employer I was terminally ill. I was not terminally ill. I had a bad knee and slightly elevated cholesterol. When Kevin showed up at my door, 3 days after leaving me on the road, a Tuesday evening, around 6, standing on the porch with his hands in his jacket pockets like he was waiting for me to invite him in. I didn't open the door all the way. I stood in the frame and looked at him. He looked tired. He hadn't shaved. He said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." I said, "I know you do." He said, "I know you do." He said, "I wasn't trying to hurt you. Things have gotten out of hand and I didn't know how else to make you listen." I said, "The insurance company told me about your call, Kevin." He went very still. I said, "And Sergeant Atkins at the Franklin County Sheriff's Office told me to let him know if you made contact." He stared at me. I think he was trying to calculate something, some angle or exit, the way he always did. But I'd already moved the pieces before he arrived. The will was updated. The beneficiaries were changed. The fraud report was filed. The locks were new. Connie was upstairs, and she knew exactly where the phone was. Kevin said, "You called the cops on your own son." I said, "You left your father on the side of a county road so you could collect his life insurance, Kevin. We passed that line already." He stood there a moment longer. Then he left. The investigation took about 4 months. The fraudulent impersonation of me to the insurance company was eventually referred to the county prosecutor's office. Kevin hired an attorney. There were negotiations I wasn't party to. In the end, he was charged with identity fraud and received 18 months of probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a fine. No prison time, which I'll admit sat uncomfortably with me for a while. But Sergeant Atkins told me that the goal of the prosecutor wasn't to destroy Kevin's life. It was to put a hard stop on the behavior and create a record. There is a record now. I don't know where Kevin is. He moved out of his apartment in Westerville sometime during the fall. I've heard through his mother that he's living somewhere in Kentucky now. Joanne called me once, crying, asking me what I had done to her son. I told her exactly what her son had done to me. There was a long silence. Then she said she was sorry. It was the first time in 20 years she'd said that about anything, and I believed she meant it. Connie and I took a week off in November and drove out to Asheville, North Carolina. We hiked in the Pisgah National Forest 3 of the 4 days we were there. My knee held up better than I expected. On the last morning, we sat on the porch of the rental cabin with coffee and watched the fog lift off the mountains. And Connie reached over and put her hand on mine without saying anything. I thought about that crow on the fence post on the gravel road in April. I thought about Kevin at 7 years old handing me a socket wrench before I'd asked for it. I don't know how a child gets from that to what he became. I've turned that question over in my mind more times than I can count, and I still don't have a clean answer. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I was too proud, too closed off with my feelings in the way men of my generation tend to be. Maybe some part of Kevin just broke somewhere along the way, and none of us caught it in time to fix it. I don't know. What I know is this. I spent 63 years building a life with my hands, earning everything I have, and giving what I could to the people I loved. I'm not going to apologize for protecting what I built, and I'm not going to let grief over what my son became make me pretend that what he did was something I could just let go. If you're watching this and you've got a son or daughter who keeps circling the topic of your estate, your insurance, your accounts, who asks questions that feel slightly off, slightly too interested in the logistics of what happens when you're gone, pay attention to that feeling. You're probably not imagining it. I thought I was being paranoid. I wasn't. Trust the discomfort. Change the locks before you need to. And make sure the people who actually show up for you are the ones your documents reflect. I raised my coffee mug to those fog-covered mountains in Asheville, and I said out loud, to no one in particular, "Still here." That was enough for me. I've had a lot of time to think about what Kevin did, and what I did, and what the gap between those two things says about how a life gets built, or doesn't. Here's what I've come to believe. The choices a person makes don't stay contained. They spread. Kevin spent years making small choices, to avoid responsibility, to take shortcuts, to look at the people who loved him and calculate what he could extract from them instead of what he could give back. None of those choices felt catastrophic in the moment, I'm sure, but they compounded. They built a version of him that could sit in a truck cab and look his 63-year-old father in the eye and make a decision that crossed a line most people can't imagine crossing. That didn't happen overnight. That was years of smaller decisions hardening into character. And I made choices too. I chose to keep pulling out that mental photograph of him at 7 years old, handing me a socket wrench every time I should have been paying clearer attention to the man he was becoming. I chose comfort over honesty, maybe more times than I want to admit. That's not self-blame. I did the best I knew how. But I understand now that loving someone and seeing them clearly are not the same thing, and I confused them for a long time. What I know about resilience, real resilience, not the kind people put on coffee mugs, is that it's not about bouncing back. It's about not letting what happened to you rewrite who you are. Standing on that gravel road in Fairfield County with a torn knee and a dead foam, I could have decided that the world owed me nothing and people couldn't be trusted. I didn't. I called Connie. I talked to Sergeant Atkins. I sat down with Ms. Okafor, and I protected what I'd built. That's not toughness for toughness's sake. That's choosing to keep functioning with integrity even when someone you loved gave you every reason to shut down. The intelligence I'm most proud of isn't anything I learned in a classroom. It's the kind that knows when a pattern is wrong even before you can articulate why. Connie had it. She saw Kevin clearly for years and never once weaponized that clarity against me. She just stayed steady and waited until I was ready to see it too. That takes more wisdom than being right out loud ever does. If I could say one thing to anyone watching this who recognizes something in this story, maybe a child who asks too many questions about your accounts, or a family member whose warmth seems to show up only when money is nearby, I'd say this: your discomfort is data. Don't talk yourself out of it. The people who genuinely love you don't need to know the logistics of your death to show up for your life. I'm still here. My knee still aches when it rains. Connie's tomatoes came in well this past summer, and on a porch in Asheville with fog on the mountains, I raised my coffee and said it out loud to no one, and I meant every word of it. Still here. That's the whole point.